is really strong on that. It goes back to the 1930s where, Bowlby, Ainsworth, the whole beginning of the attachment movement in terms of parenting. Gordon Neufeld, who's a psychologist, developmental psychologist who's worked with Gabor Mate, who's a family physician on the whole, points of origin of healthy attachment and how to deal with what Gordon Neufeld talks about is this peer attachment where kids actually move out of the family and attach themselves to peers rather than the family. So they differentiate. Stuff for another podcast. Right?
Yes.
But we were always on that, although there were, at times some differences about how we implement actual discipline, for example. My memory, there's a couple of things that stand out for me, and I think at times I might have been a little bit too hard. And I saw you as a bit of a softie in some ways. But on the other hand, there were also times that I remember where I'm going, whoa, don't cross Lorin. Kids, just keep it down. So we seem to have manoeuvred that quite well. I mean, I didn't get into your face about it, and you didn't get into mine.
But that's I think, at the core of what you're talking about is that we both agreed that our children were our priority, that everything else we did was about ensuring that we were there for our children. Our careers were not our priority. They were tools that we used to provide what we needed for ourselves in terms of, the financial stuff, but intellectually and to give us that level of satisfaction within the adult world.
Yeah.
But nothing was ever more important to us than the well-being of our children. Now, we were lucky in that we both came from backgrounds where children were the priority, that where everything was devoted to ensuring the children's needs were met. And that's just not the basic needs, that's the emotional needs as well. And we were also both lucky in that our education and our work led us to know and understand very, very completely how important it was for our children, for us to devote our 20 years to them. You have all your time before you have kids, you have all your time after they're grown up. They deserve 20 years of your devotion to thinking about them as the priority every day, what they need.
Absolutely.
Every day.
And let me come in on this particular point with and what they need at this stage is, a structure, a healthy structure that they can respond to, because kids need predictability. They need some consistency. They need to experience persistence. People often say, I don't want my kids to be unhappy. But what they're actually saying is I don't want to put up with the hassle of this kid arcing up. And I think one of the things that is really, really important as a parent within the family sort of unit is this idea that there are times when you're going to need to put up with some frustration.
Yes, and early childhood is very frustrating
for both.
For the children and for the parents. And we worked well together because we had that same orientation. We were aligned in our focus about what we wanted to do for our children. I mean, if you're going to have children, then you need to provide them with the emotional life that they need. Kids don't need you to own piles of stuff. They don't need, holidays overseas every year. What they need are two parents who are prepared to put them first and who are prepared to do the hard work of setting boundaries and structure and rules.
Coaching them emotionally.
And we managed to be the people who were able to do that together. And that cemented that attachment to each other. It's all part of the process of the relationship, and the growing together is the working together and the cooperation in alignment with each other. And so if you take it to the next stage, where the kids were sort of moving into school, and we were a little bit freer to move around them. Although actually I found it even more constraining because you had to actually then comply with school hours.
Yeah, but the other one was when they started going out to parties and things. You know, you needed to be on deck. It didn't matter whether it was 10:30 or 1:30 in the morning.
Well, that's a lot later in your life.
Yeah.
But, you know, all of this is about how we cooperate with each other in a relationship. And if you don't have that core alignment in your values about what is important, in your respect for each other, in your preparedness to cooperate with each other to make the family work, that is where you are at risk of coming a cropper, basically.
Yeah.
You know, because in terms of relationships, all relationships are going to, I mean, we've been very lucky, but all relationships are going to go through lots of challenges. You know, there's going to be challenges people have absolutely no control over.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, things happening in each other's families, workplaces, all that sort of stuff.
Health.
Nowadays, in things happening in the environment around you with COVID. These things are going to be happening in your life. And if you're working together, it's much easier to deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that's really crucial, particularly, you know, in this day and age, is that notion that we should somehow have influence over everything that, you know, we experience.
Oh, the fantasy of control.
Yeah.
Yes, well, that's a very sort of large problem of the last 50-odd years, this idea that somehow we can control things. You know, I read an article very briefly today. One of the well-known American comedians who has lung cancer, and the first thing she had to say was, "I've never smoked in my life."
That's right, I read that.
Yes. Now, why did she have to say that? Because people seem to think that you can control even whether you get sick or not by every action you take. And it's been turned around in this terrible way that people who get lung cancer are blamed for it themselves.
Yeah.
And they have to put their hands up and go, well, actually, I never did smoke, you know, or work in a smoky environment. Yeah. It's not my fault. Yeah. Well, no one should ever blame anybody on that level.
Absolutely.
And yet that's the sort of idea that people have sort of taken on board because of this idea they can control stuff. And that's been sort of coming into our thinking for most of the last 50 years as we've been given more and more information around, well, if you don't eat this or you don't eat that, or if you don't do this and you don't do that. And it's not true. It's not true. We cannot control everything. In fact, there's very little we can control other than how we respond to whatever happens in our life.
I always talk about the fact that, you know, at the very bottom of it, what I've got control over is how I think, how I feel, and what I do.
Exactly.
Outside of that, it's pretty well up for grabs. So, you know, you and I are now in the empty nest stage. Yes. I mean, we have children who've got children, so we're also grandparents, which I really, really enjoy. But that doesn't mean that we don't continue to work on our relationship. So one of the things that I thought we'd do in this particular podcast is talk a little bit about what the Gottmans have put together as 10 practices for a thriving relationship and see whether we match on this. I'm not sure if you've read it.
I've got it in front of me here.
I know, but prior to me plonking it in front of you, I've been into the Gottmans' work for a long time because as a couples therapist, it really, really helps me to frame and present material with couples that I've worked with, and I find it just really, really useful. Sometimes I don't use it at all, but a lot of times the ideas at least are there, and their research is really good. So the first one, it says he's build a culture of appreciation, respect, and tolerance. Now, you know, if we want to do a tick, I think we've done that pretty well. I mean, we have a culture in our relationship and in our family, don't we?
Well, yes, and it is a culture of appreciating each other as individual humans who have their own way of being in the world, that's a very important aspect of all relationships, is allowing others to be themselves, not trying to control and change and direct them or make them into something.
Yes.
The whole idea that you can change someone comes from that idea, and it doesn't work, and it's disrespectful.
The one thing I want to point out on that one, though, where I'm always a little thingy about, is this thing about tolerance. And the reason why I'm thingy about it is because I work with boys and men who somehow have learnt to tolerate the intolerable, i.e. like being abused.
I think that, yes, it's not a word I probably would have used myself, because tolerance is a word that is often very misunderstood. To tolerate something would suggest that there's nothing wrong, that there's no judgment in that in any way, is there? There's no sense of stepping back and looking at something and going, well, no, I'm not going to tolerate that.
So I'll give you a simple example. Prior to you and I getting together, despite the fact that I was fairly young, I had other relationships, believe it or not. And one of them was characterised by her always being late. Like, we're not talking 5 to 10 minutes. We're talking 45 minutes to an hour and a half. And that relationship, ended on that note that I just went, this is intolerable. And it's, in fact, just bloody rude. And she didn't particularly seem to have any sort of interest in changing that at all. It was sort of like, well, that's not my problem, it's yours. I said, well, it's not just mine, it's actually a whole bunch of people that are affected by this. So one of the messages that I constantly feel that needs to be understood is that there are certain things that we need to be tolerant with or be accepting of. I prefer the word
think the
accepting.
word acceptance is much better.
Yeah.
Tolerance suggests that it doesn't matter whether it's incredibly inappropriate or wrong or cruel or awful in any way, we should tolerate it.
Yeah.
And this is one of those concepts that has been quite misunderstood.
Yeah.
And taken out of a political context into an emotional context. You don't have to tolerate being disrespected. You don't have to tolerate being misused and abused. It's, and it's about whether you accept something or not. Yeah. And you accept things on the basis of whether you think that they are worth accepting.
Yeah.
There is a judgment in there, and it's absolutely right to be able to have that judgment.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's really important to be absolutely clear about the fact that unconditional love does not exist in any form outside of the relationship between parents and children. Mm-hmm. Everybody else, there are conditions.
Yes, you can't empty my bank account without my
But
permission.
it's not just that. It's that we choose people based on the conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
We choose to start to form a relationship or whether we like someone or not like someone based on conditions. Non-conditional love only exists between parents and children and only should exist between parents and children.
Okay, number 2, develop trust through sharing your vulnerability.
Vital.
Yeah.
If you can't be vulnerable with each other,
forget it.
And you can, you need to trust each other on every level. You need to be able to trust that this person is going to have your best interests at heart.
Yep. I can't stress that enough, is that this is a challenge for us as men because we've been taught to live behind a mask. So for us, vulnerability inevitably means weakness. And a lot of men are stepping out of that space, but it's a struggle. And some men are refusing to go there point blank, either consciously or unconsciously. Okay, create time and a relaxed atmosphere to interact with your partner.
Well, you can't actually form a relationship